Good evening, Columbus community. It is Board President Adair, and today is April 12th, and I am calling our special work session meeting to order. May I please have the roll?
President Adair.
Present.
Ms. Beckerly.
Present.
Mr. Brown.
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Cole.
I am here.
Dr. Pierce.
I'm present.
Mr. Ragland.
Here.
Vice President Reyes.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam President.
Thank you so much. Today's agenda, we have AJ Crable back with us from Council of Great City Schools. And we are going to be finishing up looking at the draft goals and guardrails for our 5-year strategic plan goal setting. And that is the only thing on our agenda this evening. Is there a motion to adopt our agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any changes or questions about the agenda? Seeing none, please call the roll.
President Adair.
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Cole.
Yes.
Dr. Pierce.
Yes.
Mr. Ragland.
Yes.
Vice President Reyes.
Yes.
Motion carried.
One clarifying question, if I may. I
Okay.
assume we're working from the April 1, 2021 version of this document?
I'm assuming we are the one that was
Okay.
so, yes, but we will let Dr. Dixon and AJ let us know if something is different. So actually, I'm just going to turn it over to you guys. Welcome back, AJ. It is always so good to see you.
Well, it is always wonderful to be back with you. Thank you for having me again. Excited to be able to walk through all of the work that your administration has been doing. Before we dive into that, I just want to take a moment to walk through the process again, just as a way of wayfinding. So we began this long ago with the board really making the determination that it wanted to focus more of its energy on the outcomes of our students, not merely what are the adults doing, but what result is it creating for our students in reality. To get to that point, the board recognized that it first needed to identify what are a set of goals that we're going to be focused on and that we're going to be monitoring progress toward. But at the same time that you were clear about the vision, we still can't lose track of the community's values. So the board started looking at what's a potential set of guardrails that can identify what are the non-negotiable values that have to be protected while we're on our way to accomplishing the goals. And so the board began a process to develop these, and it began that by reviewing data provided by the administration about what is the current reality for students, as well as doing a whole lot of listening. You all went out in 2 by 2, you went out into the community and listened to stakeholders, students, parents, staff, community partners. And from all of that, you all drafted up a set of potential goals and potential guardrails. The next step in that process then has been for your administration to take those and to develop a set of interim goals and interim guardrails, a set of progress measures that are the data that the board can use to see over time, are we actually getting closer to what we intend? You know, the challenge with goals is they really describe what are the outcomes for students at the end of the cycle. What you all needed your superintendent to do is fill in the gaps with what are things that we can look at throughout the cycle to let us know, are we actually getting closer to that, or are we kind of flatlined, or are we actually declining away from it? And so these progress measures, these interim goals that are a way of tracking progress relative to the goals, and the interim guardrails, a way of tracking progress relative to the guardrails, had to be developed. And that's where we find ourselves now, is that the administration has brought back earlier kind of a pre-sampling of that, and now has taken the feedback from the board, has spent a lot of time putting thought into what are the next stages of this? How will we really measure this over the next several years? And is now prepared to bring that back to you. A few caveats before I turn it over to Dr. Dixon and the team to walk through this. Caveat number 1, there's a lot of missing data. There is a lot of missing data. This is not new to you all. This is not like somebody misplaced your data or something. But over the last year of the pandemic, there are a lot of assessments that normally would have been conducted that have not been conducted. What that means as a practical matter is that you are going to have some progress measures as well as some of the actual priorities themselves that simply don't have data right now. I don't think that's problematic, partially because there's nothing to be done about it. It doesn't matter what district in America you're in right now, you're in the same situation. And so even though there are going to be some significant gaps, my encouragement to you is the best thing to do is lean into the data that you do have available. Part of what that means is you'll be in a somewhat unusual, but again, I don't think untenable situation of relying more heavily on locally derived data than on state derived data, simply because there's going to be a multi-year gap of state data available for you to look at. And so that is just one major thing to be mindful of. You're going to look at some of this data and say, there are holes here. What do we do? You press on. That's what you do, because that's all there is to do. The other big thing to note here is that you all have listened for the vision of the community. You all have listened for the values of the community, and you've codified those in a set of draft goals and draft guardrails. But some of the vision and value that you have crafted is not currently captured and is not systematically being operationalized in the district as it exists today. And so some of the things you're going to see are data that does not exist yet because it's never actually been captured before. There is no data to go back to because you're actually, through your vision, capturing the community's vision, and through your capturing the community's values, you're actually suggesting that the administration go in directions that they haven't gone before, or at least not in the way that you've defined for them to do so. This is actually a very, very healthy thing. This is what you want to have happen, is for you all to say, here's what we want for our students, and watch as the administration has to pivot and change its behavior to pursue that. What is you all say, here are the values of our community that have to be honored, and watch as the administration pivots and goes in a different direction to accomplish that. So this is very healthy, but it also leaves you without any real data for a couple of years. So that's another thing just to be mindful of, that not only are you missing data because of the pandemic, the data that would normally be available that hasn't been captured, you're also going to be looking at data for potential data captures going forward that's new activities that the administration, absent your leadership, wouldn't be doing. This is exactly what you want to have happen, but it does leave you in a situation of being without really meaningful data in a few key areas. The data will come in time, it will show up, but there's going to be a lag period. And so those are two massive caveats that I put out there, just so that as you get into this process of looking at some of the data that's going to be offered to you, and you're wondering, why does this seem like there are gaps? It's because there are. But the gaps are, the former set of gaps is really an act of God that your administration can't do anything about. And the latter set of gaps is an act of you, which the administration can't do anything about because they are obligated to follow your lead. So with that being said, because they've done the work, I don't want to steal their thunder. I want to let Dr. Dixon lead us into first walking through the goals and then some of the potential interim goals that she's devised around that. This is mostly stuff that you've already seen, but I just want to refresh some of it for you. And then dive into the guardrails after that, and the interim guardrails that she's divined around that. This is stuff that you have not yet seen, so I expect we'll spend a lot more time on that. So I'll move us with some haste through the goal section, because again, it'll largely be review, even though some things have changed. And so I want to make sure that's flagged for you. But what we really want to dig into tonight is the interim guardrails, because that is stuff that you haven't seen. And some of it I think you're really going to like, and some of it has just been so good that I've already been stealing it and sharing it with other districts so they can have some benefit from the thoughtfulness that your team has put together. With that, Dr. Dixon, I don't know if you or another member of your team want to walk us through the interim, the goals and the interim goals.
Yes, thank you, AJ, and thank you for your leadership and your guidance, and thank you, board, for your support. This has been a tough process, but we have learned so much about our district and really dived into data in a very different manner. So we're really excited about the outcomes that we know that we're going to be able to achieve on behalf of our students in Columbus City Schools. I would like to, I know AJ wants us to move through the goals, so I want to kind of set some of the guidance. Do you want us to run through the goals and then have questions after each goal? Or would you like us to go through all the goals consecutively and then ask questions?
Let's go through all the goals and their interim goals. We just introduce them briefly. And then if there's like a key, because I know that we already sent this out to the board several days ago, so they've had a chance. So if you just walk through them and offer, if there's any kind of key thing that you want to point out, and then once you walk through them all, then let's pause and open the door for questions on any of them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we'll start the presentation and Scott Wortman will provide the presentation. And then we're going to start with our goal 1 with Dr. Michelle Klein. She will start with goal 1 and then she will pass it to our next person. I'll have some comments after we finish about our next steps that we plan to do after we are done with the presentation. So we will start with our presentation. So again, our board goals are, we stated, strengthen reading proficiency, develop portrait-ready graduates, and close opportunity gaps. Those are the broad overarching goals that we established. All right, so we will start with goal number 1, strengthening reading proficiency. Dr. Michelle Klein.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon and Board of Education members. This is such an exciting time for our staff to be able to work hand in hand with you on these goals. And I thank all of you for giving us feedback with regard to these and questions. It has really enlightened all of us. Our first board goal is strengthen reading proficiency. And the goal itself is the percentage of 3rd grade students proficient in reading on the Ohio State Test, or the OST, will increase from 43%, or a decline in the benchmark due to COVID, in 2018-2019 to 55% by June of 2026. Our reading proficiency goals and interim goals are SMART goals. They're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, and they're relevant and timely. Throughout the 2021-22 school year, we will monitor and triangulate our typical and stretch growth goals in iReady using progress monitoring as well as additional data points available to us. This effort will enable creation of a full academic year baseline that will inform and enable identification of additional metrics that are specific to Columbus City Schools. These draft goals are made with a Ticonderoga pencil, to steal AJ Crable's phrase, now, but will have additional data points, which we will be collecting and using to secure testing environments and post back to in-person learning. We will then fine tune these with a pin. After a solid year of in-person testing the data, we will secure them with a Sharpie marker. This is our most educated estimate based on previous growth of 80% median growth and data from our school year 2018-19. But we will come back to you after our June analysis of in-person data that we will receive and update all information in July of 2021. We have reviewed and taken into consideration the information on our data from Dr. Kamal Shavda, psychometrician for iReady, and he concurs with our estimates. The 2018-19 school year data reflected 60% of our elementary schools due to the beginning of the iReady implementation. The median gain for CCS was 80% for typical growth that year. With our newly adopted K-12 ELA curriculum resources and the revised curriculum documents endorsed by PDK, our goal is to move to 100% median growth. To Board Member Beckerly's question submitted, we can and will measure this as an individual student growth measure. However, we will also be able to measure growth by content area, by grade level, and by student groups as well. Typical growth goal is defined as the average growth of students at the same grade level and placement level. This is based on nationwide data. If the median progress towards typical growth is about 100%, the group of students is growing on average about as expected. If the median progress towards typical growth is well above 100%, which we're aiming for, the group of students is growing on average more than expected. Due to our last statewide assessments being in spring of 2019 and no in-person testing occurring at the end of last school year, we will reflect on past improvements, but evaluate our scores this spring to determine proper increases and to see if adjustments need made. All end of the year data will be reviewed in June of 2021, and an update will be provided to the Board of Education in July of 2021. So let's figure out how we're really going to use these interim goals to support strengthening reading proficiency. Interim Goal 1.1. Interim Goal 1.1 provides the percentage of kindergarten students considered proficient on the district's end of the year diagnostic assessment will increase from 33% or decline in the benchmarks due to COVID in May of 2019 to 38% in June of 2026, or the students will demonstrate at least 100% median progress towards typical growth. To address a question submitted to Dr. Dixon earlier from the board, please note that students who achieve the on track to proficiency, as well as students that reach 100% median progress and growth, would be an affirmative number in our calculation. Interim Goal 1.2. Interim Goal 1.2 provides the percentage of first grade students considered proficient on the district's end of the year diagnostic assessments, which will increase from 24% or a decline in the benchmarks due to COVID in May of 2019 to 29% in June of 2026, or the students will demonstrate at least 100% median progress toward typical growth. And our last interim goal towards strengthening reading proficiency, Interim Goal 1.3. The percentage of second grade students considered proficient on the district's end of year diagnostic assessments will increase from 21% or a decline in the benchmarks due to COVID in May of 2019 to 26% in June of 2026, or the students will demonstrate at least 100% median progress toward typical growth. The proposed goal of 26% factors in a drop in proficiency rates of 5% each year for 2020 and 2021, which is based on a national statistic. For each subsequent year from 2022 to 2026, we anticipate a minimum of a 3% gain each year, or a total of a 15% total gain. This is our most educated estimate based on previous growth of 80% median progress and data from school year 2018-19. But we'll come back to you after our June analysis of in-person data and update all information in July of 2021. Again, remember, the psychometrician has concurred with our estimates. The 2018-19 school year data did only reflect 60% of our elementary schools because all of our elementary schools were not using iReady at that time. Remember, the median gain for CCS was 80% typical growth for that year, and we are moving forward to 100% median growth. So what is typical growth goal, and what does that mean? The average growth of students at the same grade level and the same placement level. This is based on nationwide data. If the median progress towards typical growth is 100%, the group of students is growing on average about as expected. But if the median progress towards typical growth is above 100%, the group of students is growing on average more than expected, and this is where we need to head. During these unprecedented times, we will monitor this situation and update you in July of 2021. As Dr. Pierce had mentioned previously in our meeting, we don't actually know what the COVID data will bring to us. We will know very soon in May of 2021 as we complete our end of year assessment in iReady. Now here's Dr. Breeden to talk about our portrait ready graduate goal. Dr. Breeden?
Good evening. I am so excited to be able to present school board goal number 2. The first thing I want you to do is to look at the graphic that has been prepared to really communicate the vision of the community and of our school system, what we want our graduates to, the attributes that we want them to have. First, I love the skyline of Columbus on that. And then you will notice the small icons that represent each of the attributes. The attributes are adaptability, communication, creativity, critical thinking, global empathy, and technology. And I will tell you, as I've worked with these, I think that you all did a beautiful job. There's very little overlap. They all really speak to the whole nature of the child. And I think this is, I don't know the way, this is a winner. I just really am pleased with this. You did excellent work. Another thing that has really been my North Star as we've worked with different groups on this is the banner, which says students leading the way. And I hope tonight, as I share the interim goals, you will see that we have kept that at the forefront of our thinking on this. If we'll go to the next slide, I'm going to share the goal. The percentage of the class of 2028 who earn the Portrait of a Graduate seal will increase from 0% in June of 2022 to 25% by June 2028. And now I'll go to the next slide, which will show us how we're going to be able to accomplish that goal. I think every parent or grand aunt, as I am, really want children to be fiscally responsible. And I think about how parents do that. They usually say, like, if your favorite uncle gives you a quarter, usually say, now don't forget, put that in your piggy bank. Or if an Amazon gift card may come their way, you might want to have a conversation about shipping and handling. And then as they become teenagers, you're going to talk about things like, don't forget about the insurance and also gasoline charges. So what we do is we measure our comments based on the developmental aspects of the child. And that is exactly the approach that we're going to take as we look at the pre-K through 12 continuum. First, I'd like to once again bring your attention to the banner on these graphics. It says the Columbus City Schools Portrait of a Graduate Pre-K through 12 Continuum allows students to be the architects and the artists of their own learning. We really want to really lean into the creativity attribute. We really want children to tell us what these attributes mean in their own life. So one of the first things we're going to do in every subject, in every grade, there will be a Portrait of a Graduate component to the subject or grade. So at those perfect teaching moments, we will be able to reinforce these attributes and we will be able to model them and also see them in others. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the continuum, and that's on the next slide. Like I said, we are going to take a very developmental appropriate approach to this. So we took the pre-K through 12 level and we divided it into 4s. And I want to talk about each of these and what are the outcomes we're hoping to achieve. First, in the pre-K through 2nd grade, as we thought about portrait, we thought, well, everybody needs an artist's palette. They need to think about the colors. And so we said that's where we're going to start with students. We want students to recognize and understand the attributes in themselves and in others. So as you can see from that, we're starting with simple things like, what is an attribute? What do these particular attributes mean? What does it look like when they're exhibited? What does it sound like when they're vocalized? And this way, it will just become a part of the CCS vocabulary. Everyone will understand what these words mean. Parents will hear them when the children come home from school. And so we'll really focus on building vocabulary and showing kids by what they hear and what they see, what these attributes mean. In grades 3 through 5, it's going to be a very active time of the continuum, and there is a special project at each grade level, but the outcome that we're seeking is we want the students to become self-aware of these attributes. And we took the theme of being attribute maestros, which will really be tailoring their portrait of a graduate to themselves, so it can be personalized and individualized. In grades 6 through 8, developmentally, when we're thinking about middle schoolers, we say it's really a time for exploration, and also figuring out what you're passionate about. So in grades 6, 7, and 8, they'll be doing a lot of exploring, a lot of researching, and those types of things. So we want them to explore their passion and discover their possibilities. And then in grades 9 through 12, we're really refining what they have been learning. And we're thinking about how you can take those attributes and help you find your place in the world. The students will exhibit their portrait of preparation, the skills that they have, and that will ensure their future success. So that is the global view of the pre-K through 12 continuum. If we'll go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the first interim measure. And I am excited about both this, all three of them, and I'll tell you why. It's because they're really based in research-based practices, and I think they will really strengthen a need which we have with student engagement. So interim goal 2.1 is the percentage of fourth graders who complete the Portrait of a Graduate trait rubric. And it will increase from 0% in June 2022 to 80% by June 2024. And AJ really challenged me on this. He kept saying, it's got to be what the students do. It's not what the teachers do, it's what the students do. So I went to Rick Stiggins, who is one of my favorite nationally known experts. And he said this, and this is where the idea really got some legs. He said, perhaps the greatest potential value of classroom assessment is realized when we open the assessment process up and we welcome students into the process as full partners. And that really gave me pause and got me to thinking. So if we'll look at the next slide, I'll show you what a group of us thought about as we could do this. What we want the students to do, there are 6 attributes, and we want them in grade 4 to make a rubric so that other students could say, well, how am I doing in global empathy? What am I doing about, am I being adaptable in my day-to-day life? And only a 4th grader knows what adaptability looks like in their 4th grade life and what they would be thinking about. So I think we'll really get some insight into the meaning of our attributes through this activity. It is a student-driven project. The teacher is on the side as the guide, and they will talk to the students about it and support them, but it's really about the students creating the rubric. Every elementary school will be included. Students, one of the responsibilities of the students will be to find someone who is an expert in reliability and validity, and they will have to meet with them and get feedback and perhaps change their rubric. They might ask what we used to call a double barrel question, where you've got too much information in one question and you can't really tell what you're looking at. They will also roll out the survey or the rubric, and they will analyze the findings. And let me tell you why this is going to be such a strong thing for our students to do. One, it's project-based. It's something that needs to be done. It's real life work. And it also takes in effect the research around students need to create their own assessments and their own rubrics. And then finally, as a former math teacher, I'm very happy to talk about this. The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics recently published a work around statistical literacy. And they said for students really to be ready for our world, they must wrestle with data. They must use small sets of data, large sets of data, messy data, traditional data, data that is in text, data that is also in illustrations, and be able to be wise in that. So as it's not really a math goal, but I think the application and the improvement in statistics will be very meaningful. So that's interim goal 2.1. Let's go on to this project. Now, I truly believe that this may be one of the most impactful things that we do in the work of the Portrait of a Graduate. The interim goal is the percentage of fifth graders who complete the Charette Portrait of a Graduate project. It will increase from 0% in June 2022 to 80% by June 2026. And if we could go to the next slide. I think if you're like me, when Leslie Kelly came up with the word charrette for us I was describing what we wanted, and she said, oh, it's a charrette. And I thought, I've heard that. Help me with that. Well, that is just the word cart or chariot in French. But it originated when architectural students brought their plans out into the community and got feedback. And so what we're hoping the reason we're using the word is because we really want to have an innovative atmosphere where students get feedback and they hear from different diverse stakeholders about how to generate a vision for their future. So the whole idea of the project is the students need to create something that represents where they are in their portrait of a graduate. But it doesn't have to be just a portrait. It could be a poem. It could be a musical score. It could be a garden. It could be a robot. But they have to make the connections to the attributes and describe why they did what they did. And one of the things that I think about with this is I know it will be wonderful because it's once again project-based learning. The students are driving. We have some other examples to look at. One thing, as you know, I came from an IB district where we had at the end of elementary school an exhibition. And the students did things that far exceeded what I thought they could. When they researched things, it was deeper than I thought they'd go. When they presented, I was in awe of what all they had learned. So I have that as an example. And then right here in Columbus Schools last week, I saw probably the strongest example of what we could build on. Over at 3700 this week, they have been looking at all the submissions for gifted identification in the arts. And somebody said, you got to go back there. You've got to look at all this. And they were so right. The students, what they had done to show that they were gifted in the arts was amazing. We had a wonderful rubric. We had a great way to give feedback. And we also had teachers trained. So we had rater reliability and all those things. And I thought, oh my gosh, we can build off of this. And I also thought about this. There are many children out there today in Columbus City Schools that probably did not submit something for the gifted evaluation in the arts. But if we work with them and provide them this support in the charrette, I bet they could submit what they did and we could analyze it to see if they might qualify. So this will help us find students who are gifted in an area that a lot of students don't participate in that may have gone on and we've not really leveraged their talent. So I'm super excited about this in case you can't tell, but I think it will be very meaningful as a capstone elementary project. All right, the next goal is what's going to happen in middle school. In 6th and 7th and 8th grade, once again, the students will be doing exploration. They will be seeking to find out what they're passionate about, what they love, what they've never tried that now they do like, and things like that. But at the end of the year, when they're really thinking about what they're going to do in high school and beyond, They will also plan how to earn the Portrait of a Graduate seal. We know they won't do it unless they make a plan. And so we're going to talk about that and say, let's aspire to that. And let's talk about the classes and the activities that you would need to be able to achieve that. Because we know that if you have a plan, the likelihood that you will achieve that plan is much higher. And another example of how students are leading the way is that our students will be working with us and Columbus State and other community stakeholders to develop the criteria for the seal. So as you can tell, I'm very excited about this. I think this is the kind of learning that we're hoping to see in our classroom, and I think it will make the Portrait of a Graduate attributes come to life. So at this point, we're going on to goal number 3. Michelle, I think it's you, or Dr. Clyde, I think it's you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Breeden. Our board goal number 3, close opportunity gaps. The percentage of 4-year graduation cohort students who complete state and district graduation requirements will increase from 81.2% in June of 2021 to 86% in 2026. So how will we do this? We have 3 interim goals to help us measure our progress. Interim goal 3.1. Students who complete the Algebra 1 curriculum during their first attempt by the end of their 9th grade year and earn at least 1 math credit will increase from 69% in January of 2021 to 80% in June of 2026. Student success in Algebra 1 is a high predictor of high school graduation. In a research study from Florida International University, Algebra 1 grades were an important predictor of whether students drop out or graduate. Students who failed this course were 4.1 times more likely to drop out than those who passed the course. The study added, because Algebra 1 may be considered an important prerequisite for other major facets of the curriculum, and because of its high relationship to high school dropout, a recommendation emerging from these findings is that districts address the issue of preventing failure in this course. During the 2020-21 school year, Columbus City School transitioned from an integrated mathematics model, algebraic concepts and geometry, to year-long algebra and year-long geometry. In addition to better support student need and ability, there are acceleration options for middle school students to take algebra prior to 9th grade, as well as a 2-year algebra option that provides students who need additional support the opportunity to learn the curriculum at a deeper level and at a pace that supports their skill level. Interim goal 3.2. Seniors who have earned credit in at least 1 college course, advanced placement or international baccalaureate course, or who have achieved technical skill attainment, concentrators who received a score of proficient or higher on an aligned assessment or an aligned credential will increase from 35.8% in 2020, or a decline in the benchmark due to COVID, to 45% in 2026. Students who earn college credit through CCP, College Credit Plus, AP, Advanced Placement, or IB, International Baccalaureate, and or attain a technical skill credential or proficiency score on a CTE assessment will not only be meeting high school graduation requirements, but they will also be better prepared for post-secondary education and the workforce. Currently, 35.8% of our students from the class of 2020 have met this benchmark, and we are working to increase this percentage to 45% or greater by 2026. In a study from the University of Iowa, persistence in post-education inferential statistics suggested that dual enrollment participation may play a significant role in persistence to degree, especially for students who entered college within 7 months of high school graduation, those who acquired 20 or more college credits by the end of the first year of college, and those who continued their enrollment in post-secondary education without a break of more than one semester through the second year of college. Dual enrollment students were 11% more likely to persist through the second year of college than non-participating students. And dual enrollment students were 12% more likely to enter college within 7 months of high school graduation than non-participating students. Dual enrollment students who completed 20 or more credits in the first year of college were 28% more likely to persist through the second year of college than were students who did not complete dual enrollment courses. These composite persistence factors constitute academic momentum toward a degree. Dual enrollment participation therefore indicated statistically significant impacts upon students' academic momentum. Accumulating credits in high school may have a nest egg effect, thereby influencing students' decisions to remain in college and creating a positive outcome for dual enrollment participants in post-secondary education. This interim goal is not only aligned with the research above, but also with the Ohio Department of Education's expectations for prepared for success on our state report card. Interim Goal 3.3, the percentage of students who receive special education services in their schools, either by home address or by choice, will increase from 55% in June of 2021 to 65% by June of 2026. Almost 30 years of research and experience has demonstrated that the education of children with disabilities can be made more effective by having high expectations for such children and ensuring their access to the general education curriculum and peers to the maximum extent possible. This is adapted from federal law IDEA. For example, research has found a strong relationship between the amount of time spent in general education and achievement in math and reading for students with disabilities. Students and families who are able to attend their school by address or school by choice are more likely to be engaged, invested, and have access to their authentic peers. Currently, 45% of our students receiving special education students are displaced in order to receive these services. For example, if a student is newly identified with a disability, they may need to be enrolled in another building just to receive the services they require. We want to ensure we have strong schools across all of our regions, and this goal will target that need. Here's Dr. Breeden to wrap up the differences between our board goals and guardrails and how they complement and support each other. Dr. Breeden?
All right, did we want to stop here or just keep going?
Let's pause here. Let's check in with board members about the goals, and then we'll move on to the guardrails. So board members, again, you've had this, I think, for a little over a week now. So you've had some time to process. Obviously, some of you have had opportunities to submit some questions, but now we're here live. Kind of what questions come up for you, or what clarifications do you need? Eric, I saw your hand go up, and then Carol, I see you have a question. Eric, take us away. You're muted.
Thank you for that. Just have a few questions. And there are several examples throughout the document where either a passive voice is used or the item doesn't necessarily say who's responsible for it. For example, in the background for Goal 1, second paragraph, it talks about all end of year data will be reviewed in June 2021 and an update will be provided by the board. By who is my question, and should we make sure that throughout this we've identified who's responsible?
Yeah, let me respond to that. 100% of the time, the superintendent's responsible. Now, what you're going to run across in that particular instance is that there are some concerns about the validity of your data, only because we're missing a lot of data. And so what staff is trying to describe there is that we're going to have another data capture period coming up. And once we factor that data in, we'll have a much more reliable ability to estimate future progress for you. So that's what that particular item means, is that we're going to have some more data come in and we'll have better data for you in June. But anytime, 100% of the time, when you're looking at the goals and guardrails, 100% of the time, the responsible party is always the inimitable Talisa Dixon.
That's helpful.
Sure.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Carol?
I just want to say that I love all of this and I love the work, but I don't want to take up a lot of time. So I'm not going to go over all the little things I love, even though there's quite a bit. About goal 1 and probably 3 for that matter. I think that we should all expect that the goal capture at the end of the year is one set of data. It may be a different scenario at the beginning of the year. And what I don't want, or what I want us to just everybody to think about, is that whoever shows up for testing at the end of the year are going to be people that the kids that we've been largely engaged with to some degree. And there might still be a group that we're not going to really catch up with until we're back in school full time. So, and that difference might display or be in evidence in terms of who tests at the end of this year and who shows up in September. And I just don't want us to, and then therefore I'm afraid that our June numbers might be inflated versus the reality of when school starts and we're back full time. So just don't keep that in mind, that we might have to re-baseline in September. The second thing, I'm happy to hear that we'll have this mean growth toward goal for every student, because that's so important that we're focusing on individual growth and measuring that. What I'm confused about still, and I'll take 1.1 as the example. So if we get, say we hit our target of 38% past the iReady proficiency of 3rd grade at the end of the year, and 62%, that's actually, no, that's not what I'm asking. Say we don't hit the 38%, we get it 26%. I'm worried about, I'm trying to understand the or we're either at 38% or 100% growth. Like, could we have, say, just for sake of argument, I know this is stupid, but no proficient and everybody makes 100% growth and then we've hit the goal? So that means we're focusing on growth for everyone. And
That's correct.
And if, well, all right, then here's the flip side of that. Say we beat the proficiency goal and we're at 50% are proficient instead of the 38, right? Do we only satisfy the goal if the other 50% are at 100%?
No. So Dr. Dixon, may I answer Board Member Beckerly's question, ma'am?
Yes.
So Board Member Beckerly, I tried to incorporate your question into my presentation, but I might not have said it specifically enough. So we're looking for the total percent of kindergarten students in 1.1 that are considered proficient, and or the number of students that are also demonstrate at least 100% of the median progress. So I'm looking at you as an individual for the end of the year assessment, as well as whether or not you made that growth, because growth to us is very, very important. And even though it's not proficiency, we are focusing on growth.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But what I'm concerned about is we get, say, 50% of the kids over the proficiency mark, right? But only of the remaining 50% of the children, only 25% of them hit 100% median progress toward goal.
Okay.
Will we have still met the goal?
Yes, ma'am, we would, because what we are doing is we are putting them together. So there are many children, unfortunately, that are way below grade level. And so let's say I'm I'm just going to make this up. I'm a second grade student and I'm reading at the beginning of a first year level. And I make progress clear towards second grade, middle year level.
Right.
I want to, even though I didn't make proficient, I want
Right.
to make sure that we have captured that growth and that we have said, hooray for you. Now we realize that it is going to take a while for us to close that gap.
Sure.
We have got to start with at least 100% median progress towards typical growth, because in 1819, we were actually only at 80%.
Right.
And so we felt that 100% was a good goal, but giving us a little bit of playing room. So that's why we did both we did an or instead of you just, you could only use the proficient mark.
I understand that. I guess I'm not, is anybody else capturing what I'm trying to say? Like, in my scenario, we get 50% of the students pass the test and are proficient. So you beat your 38%.
Great.
There's still 50% more of the students left. Now, if only 25% of them are at 100% median progress toward goals, that means 25% of them didn't even make that annual target.
Correct.
Of a year's worth of what we want the year's worth of growth to be.
Because
and
typically in a year's worth of growth, 50% of the kids make it and 50% do not. So we would still meet our goal, because you would have your 50, which if we make 50% of kindergartners on EOY, I will be elated.
I know. I guess I'm just trying to tease out the or, and I'm still, all right, let me think about it a little more. I don't want to take up any more time.
And I have a whole fact sheet on typical growth. If you're interested in details, you just let me know.
Okay.
Thank you.
I love goal 2. Goal 3, of course, being a special ed teacher, I really love it. The only thing I want to say about it is, or make sure I'm understanding it correctly, I'm assuming that means that we will probably have more favorable ratios between our special ed teachers and our students than the state maximum, because the students get to go to their neighborhood school or their school of choice rather than where we send them to fill the slots. Is that accurate?
That's correct, Board Member Beckerly. It would also mean that we would have to increase our special education services.
Okay, that's wonderful, because well, it's just wonderful. I won't waste any more time.
We just find through all of the research that students are more engaged when they get to go to the school by address or by their school by choice, just like any other student.
Well, I mean, so that there's the benefit of that engagement thing you're talking about, but there's also the benefit is that we're going to have a lot more special ed teachers, which will lead to the other thing you mentioned, which is more inclusion into the general ed setting, because we'll be able to team teach, all of which are just wonderful. But I could talk a long time about this. I'm going to try hard not to.
That exposure to content curriculum is huge.
Ramona, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. I'm with Carol. I like these. I liked your going through it also. So mine are just a little bit of clarifying questions. In the background under the interim goal 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, when I go into the additional portrait of a graduate preview, it talks about students will work with an expert to ensure reliability and validity. Who's that?
That is going to be part of their challenge. It could be a math teacher, a middle school math teacher who could help them. It could be a teacher who has maybe had a lot of, earned a doctorate and had really had statistics. I don't think it will be really hard, but it also may be a neighbor. It might be a mathematician, a high school kid who's in stat, and they'll have to tell us, how did they determine that person was an expert? And I think that's going to be, I hate to say it, part of the fun is for them to figure out who is that person? Who do we know? Who, using our connections, just like we do at work, who do we know?
Perfect. Thank you. In the next page, it is interim goal 3.2. It talks about the International Baccalaureate, the TSA, all those. So we've had this issue come before the board before about not having access to advanced placement in some of these baccalaureate programs in the majority or a larger number of our schools. Similar to 3.3, is our goal also to increase that access within our high schools?
We would like to increase it, but the good thing, and I don't usually use this phrase, about the COVID situation is we've also doing a lot more online. And so I know when I was a high school AP and doing the master schedule, if you didn't have 10 kids, the course didn't make. But now what we can do is say we've got 3 kids over at this school, and we've got 5 kids over at this. We'll need to set up some type of area at the high schools where the students can go in and Zoom. And, you know, maybe there's 2 at this school and they can find an area. Oh, do you like that? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ragland. So I think that our eyes have been open. We've also been using iPads in our AP and IB classes and some of our special ed classes and some of our regular ed classes. And that has also really even helped us more as we're working, let's say, with a chemistry AP class or something like that. So the good news is we've learned a lot through this, but I'm excited because I hate for a child to miss out on an AP class just because there weren't 9 other people who wanted to take that.
Thank you. Those are my big general questions.
Michael, you had a question?
Actually, I'm okay. I'm still digesting. I'm gonna hold out for a quick second.
There's a lot to digest. Then while that is happening, let's actually, Jennifer, if you could just share your comment out loud and then we'll move on to guardrails. Okay,
I was just sharing like praise. I just want to tell the team I think that they did a great job. And for me personally, no, I'm not an educator. I'm not in this field as an expert. But what I want is to hear us think about it broad, holistically, child-centered. And that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing you push. I'm hearing the hard work. I'm hearing the innovation. And it's exciting. And so, this is really going to make us really holistic, child-centered, data-driven as we continue to push forward. And I just hope you're ready for us to really dig in, because now as we have created these goals and the guardrails, as we'll get to, that's really what our meetings will be centered around. And we're gonna, really start to learn, to process, to push, to continue on this path. So I just wanted to say I'm excited personally, and I think that you all did a great job.
Yeah, thank you very much. For that shout out to the staff, and Eric, just as a heads up, when you see that caveat in there, that kind of that carve out about COVID, essentially there's a recognition that as some of the additional data comes online, we may find out that as a result of instructional loss, that students who we thought would be here are actually here. And so it may be that our baseline in some circumstances, I doubt it'll be all, that's not been my experience nationwide, but in some areas, your baseline today may actually be lower than it was in school year 18-19. And so that's what that caveat is there. Again, we'll have better data by midsummer and be able to hopefully then pull that out as a caveat once we actually have some confirmation. But yeah, I just want to join Jennifer. There's some creativity here that goes beyond what I see a lot of people lead into. The board kind of threw the gauntlet down and said, bring us something that is more holistic, and your administration has answered the call with a level of creativity that is just unusual. And so many eyes will be on you watching what Columbus City Schools does to figure out what they can learn from the path that you're blazing. Ramona?
So AJ, I wasn't going to ask you, but this is, you said we're going to get data this summer. As once we go through this project, will there be a schedule set up for presentations based to receive data?
Yeah, once you all finalize the goals and guardrails, because you've reached a comfort with the interim goals and interim guardrails, then the next task that you'll assign your superintendent to is to come back with a draft monitoring calendar that says, in this month, we're going to look at this specific piece of data. In this month, we're going to look at this piece of data. This month, you're actually going to build that out over a 5-year period. So we'll be able to tell you exactly what we're going to be doing in August of 2023 and October of 2024 and January of 2025. That way there's no hiding, there's no gotcha. So the board doesn't feel like the administration is playing hide the ball. The administration doesn't feel like the board is playing gotcha. Like, all the cards are on the table. This is the data, and the data is the data. There's not going to be, well, what had happened was, no, the data is the data at that point. And so, yeah, that is a critical part of this process. And that's the next step in this. Once you get the metrics nailed down, then you can build a calendar, because then you actually know when the data is freshly available. Like, it's not really useful to bring you all data in June that has been sitting around since December. Like, you want the data when it's freshest. And so first we set the metrics, and then once we know those, then you'll ask your superintendent to create a calendar of, okay, right when the data is immediately available, that's when on the board we want you to bring it to us.
So AJ, in the past, when we talked about monitoring reports and things like, and maybe I'm going too far, hold up onto this, but as we talked about monitoring reports, there was a back and forth discussion with the superintendent to talk about, this is what we want to see and how we want to see it, so that these are our expectations. This is what we think is you met in progress. Is that a part of our process?
Yes. So once you have a calendar in place, then the next step after that is then building out the template for the monitoring reports you'll be receiving. This is actually going to require a whole nother round of training. It'll require a round of training for you, the board, to get acclimated to having conversations around monitoring. It also requires some training for the administration to get acclimated to building out monitoring reports that meet the board's kind of high expectations for data and reliability. But then also just kind of getting used to that type of conversation. Honestly, a lot of your conversations over the past year and a half or so that I've been watching some of your board meetings, I spent a lot of time talking about, did the adults do this? Did the adults do that? It is a very different conversation to get into what is it that our students know and are able to do, and what evidence do you have that that's the case? And now that we see where it is, if it's surpassing our expectations, what are you doing to grow that and to replicate that? If it is, underperforming our expectations, what specific pivots or corrections are you enacting that we can rely on to try to adjust that? And so all of that is, once you have a monitoring calendar in place, we'll actually schedule a whole another round of training just to get you all ready to start the monitoring process.
And the reason I asked that, AJ, because some of our board has never gone through, what interpretation of a goal, how you set that back and forth. So I appreciate your comment, Board Member Brown, but it's similar, but it's still different, because there is an treasurer's report is, now I don't want to say it's black and white, but it's money when you're dealing with student progress and student data. And then to prevent us from going down a rabbit hole, we have to be very intentional what the interpretation of her presentation is going to be, so that we don't veer out to AJ's comment, what the adults are doing versus the kids.
And that's why it's going to require more training. Dr. Priest, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. I'll start off by saying that I appreciate the presentation thus far. The attention to Bloom's higher order learning, I truly appreciate that. We're moving from a district where students are being encouraged to remember, to regurgitate to a district where students are creating. So I've been taking notes. The fact that students get to create their rubrics excites me. Understanding and recognizing the place of the charrettes, I appreciate the examples. As we talk about data though, one thing that I'm concerned about, or I want us to know if we're being mindful of this as we plan, is how are we collaborating with our community partners that are also supporting our academic goals and after school program, summer program. So how are we ensuring that we have shared measures? We want to know that, for example, if it's our Cap City program, if it is our Young Scholars program over at Ohio State, if it is our I Know I Can program, that their measures are aligning with our measures as well.
Yeah, I'll let Dr. Dixon jump in on this. One thing I'll say from working with other districts, you're actually going to have to go out and have that explicit, and actually when I say you, this is really Dr. Dixon's, she's going to be the one having to do this, or her team will. But they're going to have to actually go out and rehab the conversation practically partner by partner to say, here are the specific things that as a school system, our board is now holding us accountable for. And here's how our board has accepted that it's acceptable to measure progress in these areas. And so we're sharing that with you because that means the nature of our partnership has to adjust now, because it doesn't make sense for us to be partnering in ways that don't further these things. And so when a school system has that conversation, in a healthy and proactive collegial way, what I've observed is that you actually start to shift a lot of the work that's happening in the community as well. Say, okay, the district is focusing on this thing, and this is the curriculum they're using, and they're making that freely available to the community. And so we've got to dive into that. So for example, at some point, you're going to have to retrain your fourth grade teachers. Like if you're going to pull off exactly what you just heard, fourth grade teachers are going to have to be retrained. What that also means is the materials that you're using for retraining your fourth grade teachers, it would be in your best interest to make those same materials freely available to partners like Boys and Girls Club, so that they can start to create some alignment with their fourth grade programming as well. But I find that is not going to organically happen from the community. The district's going to have to proactively reach out and say, hey, we're moving in this direction. This is where the board's leadership is driving us. And here are the curricular materials. The districts that seem to have success with this, generally you're going to have to take a more open door approach. Hey, we are having this professional development session. Would members of your staff be interested in joining us for this professional development session? Hey, we have switched over to using these instructional materials for our third grade after school enrichment. We are willing to make these available to your organization, whether they're for-profit, nonprofit. Like honestly, that's not the biggest thing I would encourage you to be caring about. If they're working with the same students you're working with, you want them singing from the same hymnal that your staff is singing from. But again, that's not going to organically happen. Your staff's going to have to, led by a superintendent, is going to have to reach out and engage. So that's been my experience of where, when that's happened, that it's really been great to watch, but where things have fallen apart is when that didn't take place. Dr. Dixon, I don't know if you want to jump in and share your thoughts on that.
I think you've answered the process that we've already started in the district. So my first year, that was the main reason I started the engagement strategy, because we did not have aligned partnerships in the district. We had a lot of partners, but it was not aligned to the outcomes that we were getting. So we established that strategy. We had a partnership convocation. We explained to the partners, and I openly stated that because of the report card grade that we received, no one owned that grade. And we had several partners that were partnering with the district. So how can we align our strategies so that the results that they were providing for their organizations match the results that we were getting in our organizations. And so we talked to all of our partners. I think we had 300 or more, maybe 400 at this partnership convocation at 3,700. And we talked to them about how we're going to align our resources, align the work, share our resources, make them more active participants with our teachers in our buildings so that we all were striving for the same outcomes. And we have a partnership registry that Alicia and her team are working on. So to your point, Dr. Pierce, that work has already started. Now it allows us to have something in writing that we can provide, a document. We were talking about this one pager. So now we can provide a document for our partners. And then one other step, and we can talk about it a little more later, Alicia and her team are meeting with another school district that I was introduced with that has really taken this strategy to another level to kind of get some insights of what they are doing. Because we want to be able to assist our partners. We had many partners that said, you know what, we're going to walk away at this point because we can't meet the accountability. Accountability is here and we know it, and we need to go back and revise our strategy. That means the partner. But we have a lot of amazing partners who are bringing data, who want to strengthen their approach, matching ours, and we want the evidence of that. We want to have evidence that we are, we're striving for the same goal. There's not a different work. We can share these resources, especially since we're using online platforms now. And so we're almost to that point. So we're glad you brought it up, Dr. Pierce. And thank you, AJ, for your explanation. But we are already there. We're just going to strengthen that and tighten that up a little more.
Let's dive into the guardrails.
All right. I know Scott is busy bringing them up for us right now. The first one, why he's bringing it up, is fun intervention support. And I'll wait just a moment. By the way, I was thinking while we're waiting that Stan could be our expert in reliability and validity. I'm going to put his name out there because I know he's always willing to help us with that.
Is Scott here?
Scott?
1 second, I'm working on it.
Okay. Okay. All right. These are the 4 guardrails that we're going to be talking about, and we just wanted you to see them in one list so that you can kind of have a holistic view as we go forward. And the first one, like I said, is fun intervention supports. The guardrail is the superintendent will not allow the multi-tiered system of support, or the MTSS, for students' needs to be underfunded. And I put in there the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 model that is often seen when we're talking about our MTSS. And this is one thing I want to point out at the onset of this. First, there are 2 systems. You'll see one side is the academic system of support for students, because we certainly are a school system and we certainly are interested in academics. But just as much, there is the second system, which is a behavioral system. So many times when people see this, they think, oh, that's for the student who is struggling. It's more than that. This is really for every student in CCS. Because, for example, on the behavioral system, it might be that the classroom rules are posted. That would be something in tier 1. And then, of course, the core curriculum is in tier 1 for the academic system. So please, I want to be clear that this is for all students, and this is a weighty responsibility, but it is probably absolutely essential to making sure our students' needs are met. All right, let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about how we're going to work with this guardrail. The thing that is really difficult right now during the pandemic is we rolled out the MTSS and we've had meetings and we have trained all our teachers on it, but we really don't know what's out there. I feel like I don't have my GPS on in my car. You know, we don't know where we are at. And so that's going to be one of our first steps. But in our interim guardrail 1.1, CCS schools will increase from 0% at the begun implementation scale on the MTSS system of rubric, implementation rubric in June 2022 to 100% by June 2026. Like I said, this is one of those measures that AJ said that we do not have. It exists right now, so we're going to have to start at 0%, saying we don't know where we are. And then we hope that 100% of our schools are at the begun implementation part of the rubric. And I'm going to talk about why that is the case as we go a little bit deeper here. So if I could have the next slide, please. In our course, which is in our learning management system about MTSS, this chart is in there. And I think this really helps us deepen our understanding about what the MTSS is and what it is not. If you'll take just a second, please read the very first row for underneath what the MTSS is and what the MTS is not. It begins with an instructional system. And then read across for me. I won't read it to you. I'll let you read it. I'm going to give a personal example. You may not know this about me, but I used to be the principal of John Trotwood Moore Middle School in Nashville, Tennessee, very close to Vanderbilt campus. If you've been down in Nashville, you'll know right the area of town where my school was. And I had some students that struggled in math, and I also had a lot of students that came to school early and they were outside of the building. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to open the building about 20 minutes early, and I'm going to let the students go in and meet with their math teachers and work on math. That is what MTSS is not. It's a good idea. It helped some students. But the MTSS is where you really build an infrastructure. You know which students are coming. You know what needs they have. You also know if there's a social emotional component to it. So what I was doing at John Trotwood Moore was nice, but it was not MTSS, and it probably did not make a huge difference. So that shows the contrast and why this is so difficult to implement. If you look down to the fourth row, it starts with the use of a set of evidence-based practices. If you'll read that line across. The fourth one down where it says the use of evidence-based practices in curriculum instruction and assessment is exactly the type of information we got from the PDK audit. It showed our weaknesses. It did show some areas of strength, but we have the map of what we need to do now. And that is part of the MTSS, is to make sure that we have a guaranteed and viable curriculum that we just don't have on our website, but that we have delivered to our students. So that is also a very heavy lift. And then if you'll see what it's not, it's an intervention in place of the core curriculum. Both Ms. Beckerly and I love foundations. We know that it is an effective program for helping students who are struggling readers. But if all we have is foundations, we bought it, but we're not sure it's being implemented with fidelity. We don't want students to meet the regular grade level reading class either. So it's more than just you buy something and you say, we do foundations. It is really making sure that it's entwined and appropriately placed within the curriculum. So I wanted to show you this so you can see that this is a lot of work. One of the most important part of that goal is I said 100% of our schools. It is very easy in a large district to say, well, we got 75% of the schools. Frankly, that's not good enough. Every child in Columbus City schools must be supported, whether they need it every day, they need it just once in a while, or rather they need it on a regular routine basis. We all need support to be successful. So it's a heavy lift. Well, if we'll go to the next slide, while our principals and our teachers will be looking and advising each other on how to really implement the MTSS, what I found that I thought would be a good way to measure it, especially for board purposes, is I found an MTSS implementation rubric from the Department of Education in Arizona. I tweaked it a little bit and I changed the scales a little bit. But as you look under begun implementation, it's not that you read the book or you took the class. You really are beginning to dig into the components. So because I'm not sure where we are with the pandemic, that is why I decided at this point on this goal to use begun implementation. Like AJ said, we're doing our best that we can under the circumstances, but it will be a rigorous rubric, but we have not developed it yet. So that's just where we find ourselves in this. But we truly believe that this will raise achievement. It will help our literacy. It will help our Algebra 1. It will help every other goal if we're successful in this. And now Ms. Ward is going to come and talk more about the behavioral side of the MTSS.
Thank you, Dr. Breeden. As Dr. Breeden began to discuss the MTSS process, listening to those words, multi-tiered system of support, it's a system, it is an infrastructure. And so a part of this, the guardrails that I'm going to go through really sit on the behavioral side of the house, the social emotional side that works collectively and works in tandem academically. And so when she showed the tiered supports, the guardrail 1.2 really is starting to address school climate. We're basing that off of our Panorama survey that says the school climate student favorable responses from Panorama will increase from 61% to 75%. Why is the school climate favorable responses important? Because you're going to see further down where we are really going to tackle restorative practices. And when you look nationally and you look at positive school climate and cultures where young people feel like they are engaged, where they are connected, where the academic instruction is at the rigor level, that our young people are in a place where they feel accepted, they can thrive, they're developing relationships, and they're understanding how to engage in the world and what that looks like. And they begin to feel that they are connected, which helps them be in a place academically where they can succeed, where they can try, where they can risk, because they have a school climate and a school culture that supports that. If you could go to the next guardrail. So guardrail 1.3, this is a tiered fidelity inventory. And I got a question about this a little earlier. So I want to spend a little bit of time about the tiered fidelity inventory. PBIS, the National Center of PBIS, from an evidence-based model, has suggested the tiered fidelity inventory as the fidelity standard. And so in our district, we have the tiered fidelity inventory, TFI for short. They are in place for tiers 1, 2, and 3. And so remember that tier 1 is universal. That's what is a school-wide behavioral expectations? What does that look like? How is it being implemented? And our school buildings implementing that with fidelity. If they're implementing with fidelity, then the foundation and the structure is in play that can be built upon. For example, in the tiered fidelity action planning that our building teams are going through, and they're going through that process now, actually, there are themes and items lifted up around behavioral expectations. Teams have to go through and say, what are our behavioral expectations? How are we teaching that? Are we teaching that regularly and consistently? Are we reteaching if there are challenges that are occurring? What does that look like? What are our problem behaviors? How are we defining problem behaviors? What is our discipline policy? How are we having professional development so our students know what are the expectations? And if something happens and they don't know what the expectations are, what's the process and the structure in place so that we reteach that? There are other components that look at discipline data and about other types of data that begin to help make decisions so that we're making decisions based on our data. So the tiered fidelity inventory becomes pivotal around PBIS because it begins to set the foundation and the infrastructure that we need from a tier 1 perspective. You'll see a little later when we go through Guardrail 2 that there is also the tiered fidelity inventory for tier 2, because that actually gets to some comments that were earlier around our community partners, around our targeted supports, and how are we intentionally identifying student need and matching them with the right tiered supports to help make them successful. The TFI action planning form is what I've just talked about, and that is looking at both the universal prevention, what are we laying the foundation for that all of our students are receiving, and then how are we making decisions and providing the targeted supports for our young people when we find that they may need extra behavioral support. The behavioral supports are the conversations we've had over the years around social emotional learning competencies, around trauma-informed practices, around restorative practices that we are building up with our young people to help them as they engage in this academic journey. Our social emotional learning competencies and on the panorama, there are 2 categories. There's social emotional learning competencies. We've pulled out the supportive relationships. So how supportive students feel with their relationships. And then our student supports and environments, school climate, which I've talked about earlier. And so when we take a look at our guardrails and we take a look at our panorama data, we're lifting up supportive relationships. How are our students feeling connected? Where are the gaps? Where are the opportunities for continued growth? And how do we lean in and create an atmosphere where our young people feel supported so that they are in a place that they can achieve? We talked about the portrait of a graduate. And so all of these pieces begin to align when you talk about a holistic system of support. Guardrail 2, I think it's still me, sorry about that. Prioritizing whole child. ODE came out with their whole child framework. And it's exciting because really our district has been leading this in many ways over the last several years. And so the superintendent will not allow the district to ignore a whole child approach. So job-embedded professional development and coaching and restorative practices will increase from 10% of buildings trained in 2021 to 40% of buildings trained. And I got a clarification earlier, and yes, this is not just about training to train. This is about intentional, strategic, systematic training that is sustainable, where staff are fully trained. When restorative practices are implemented with fidelity, which is why the tiered fidelity is important because it lays the foundation in the framework. PBIS lays the foundation in the framework. When we build upon this and we are beginning to have our schools trained in restorative practices, we begin to understand relationship building. We understand community. We understand when harm happens and when harm occurs that we have to deal with that. But we're teaching our young people how to deal with that in a positive way that holds them accountable for the behaviors and decisions and things that may have done that was harmful, but it also gives voice to the person who has been harmed. And so there is a system and a structure, because we want to raise our young people not just to be astute academically, but to be astute in the world from a social emotional lens. And so as we begin this process, this is going to be a lift. We started this lift a while ago. We're making some changes and looking at regional implementation. So we're taking our time and we are building in coaching. That has been one of the things we found out previously was we were trying to develop this space of training, but the coaching. In restorative practice, there's this place or there's a phrase that says, we separate the deed from the doer. And when you hear that, you think, that's right, we separate the deed from the doer. But when it's you who've been harmed, it can be difficult to separate the deed from the doer. That takes skill and that takes intention. And so as we work with this whole child approach, certainly restorative practices is at the helm. Please know we have not lost the trauma-informed practices piece. We are going to be embedding that into this work because we recognize that our young people are coming to the table with some traumatic experiences, and that can shape how we see and how we experience the world. So that part will not be ignored, but we recognize that we want to lean into the restorative practices. Next slide. Supportive relationships, I touched on a little bit earlier. The rationale for supportive relationship is that when you look at the national research around supportive relationships and having a caring adult and having people who our young people can lean in, it creates and opens up creativity, it opens up innovation, it helps them develop empathy, it helps them to take risks that they may not have taken before. And so we want to monitor that, and we want to track that, and we want to make sure that we are creating these foundation pieces that continue to build the supportive relationships. And then the last guardrail in this particular section is around the tiered fidelity inventory again. And this is important because in tier 2 of the tier fidelity action planning, we get to a comment, Dr. Pierce, that you made a bit ago in the conversation from Dr. Dixon and AJ, and that is, how are we beginning to identify those targeted tiered supports, both academically and behaviorally? We have young people who need additional support, and how do we systemically recognize who are our partners, what areas of expertise do they have? We line that up with the needs of the buildings and the needs of the students, and we make appropriate valid matches so that our young people's needs are getting met. We have a system and an understanding of what partners are doing what. So what are our internal stakeholders doing? What are our external stakeholders doing? And how do we have a referral process, a monitoring process to be able to make sure that the work that we need to be done to help our students is being done, and that we hold accountability both internally and externally. And so with that, I believe I am turning it over for Guardrail 3 discussion.
Okay, that'd be Stan.
That would be me. Thank you very much. This is board guardrail number 3, align resources equitably. It states that the superintendent will not allow any region to be without strong learning communities. And I would say that this guardrail, like many of the others, as we began to work on it, many data issues, data that we didn't have, data and metrics that were not yet created or calculated. So while we have these interim guardrails stated, there's obviously still a lot of work to do. And when we began to speak about resources, we categorized them in 2 groups: financial and human resources. So how do we align and equitably allocate or distribute those financial and human resources? The first interim guardrail, guardrail 3.1, is that the correlation between the annual budget allocation, and this is the financial budget allocation, the correlation between the annual budget allocation and the district developed metric for student need will increase from 0 in May of 2021 to 0.6 by June of 2023. the first thing I'll point out about this interim guardrail is this measurement is a correlation. What is the correlation or the relationship between the dollar amount per pupil that we allocate to schools and those schools' student need level as measured by a yet to be developed metric? We've had some meetings with some outside folks coming up to talk about what that student need metric would be. Lots of ideas, but we don't really have a measurement for that yet. So this correlation, we suspect is probably zero at this point, since we don't have that student need metric. So that's where we're starting from, a baseline of 0. So we will strive to increase that correlation to 0.6 by 20 of 23, such that we can demonstrate that we are allocating those financial resources to the areas of greatest student need. So as student need goes up, so does that dollar allocation increase as well. So that's what we mean by that correlation. Still a lot of data to collect and metrics to be developed. And one might think that this is a fairly easy relationship to measure and report out on. And we found as we got into it, even when we talk about the dollars per student that we allocate, the question comes up, which dollars are we speaking of? General fund or all fund? How do we look at the dollars expended on certain non-personnel costs that may be kind of overhead costs, the utility budgets and things like that? Are those in that budget allocation? So we have a lot of learning and discovery yet to do, even on just looking at what dollars are we talking about being allocated. The next two interim guardrails have to do with the human resources allocation, and I will turn that over to Mike DeFabo.
Thanks so much, Treasurer Bohoric, and board members. Thank you so much for having us today so that we can talk through this important work. For Board Guardrail 3, for aligning resources equitably, Interim Guardrail 3.2 speaks to the percentage of personnel allocated to leadership and discretionary roles based on district developed internal metrics for educator effectiveness. Will increase from 0% in May 2021 to 25% by June 2023. This is another one that relates back to what Stan was saying earlier. It's something we need to develop. We certainly have external metrics around what it means to be effective, but we need to know what it means to be effective for CCS. And so we acknowledge that effective instructional leadership and instruction as key levers in ensuring student achievement and improving academic performance. We will monitor, promote, and develop effective instructional leadership and instruction, and we'll utilize internal educator effectiveness measures in our decision-making. And that's the real pivotal point there. It's not just about, let's figure out what it means to be a great educator here. It is also, how do we then use that in our decision-making moving forward? So to Board Member Beckerly's submitted question, this does not inherently mean that we're adding new positions. Inherently, I say. What it really means is that, and we'll talk about school staffing next in the next guardrail. It means we're ensuring our most effective staff are the ones that we are utilizing the most to make the most impact. So we're promoting our very best into our principal and assistant principal jobs. All of our discretionary funding and all these positions that we add every year and year over year, we're making sure that the right people are in those jobs. So this work is going to include engaging stakeholders all across the district to create not only the metric, but also the decisions about how we make decisions, which we love to plan, but we have to make sure we get that right. It also includes continued collaboration with all of our labor partners. There's a lot of work here. So we have to do a lot of planning and make sure the right people are at the table. We have some of the best educators in the country at CCS. This goal is all about making sure that we are multiplying their impact on our students. And so that's what we're going to do through Interim Guardrail 3.2. So we can move on to 3.3. This is increased from 0% in June 2021, the project of creating, implementing, and normalizing a school-based comprehensive staffing model to 100% by June 2023. We are going to create an innovative comprehensive staffing model to ensure equitable allocation of human resources to schools. This work is very near and dear to my heart. The model will demonstrate how individual schools receive allocations for personnel based on projected student enrollment and many other key factors. The focus on workforce planning will really establish a direct collaboration and correlation between the CCS budget, which is a big budget and a lot of money, and can be somewhat nebulous at times, to what school staffing looks like. The measure for this work is going to include progress monitoring, a project plan, obviously, with a timeline. And AJ spoke earlier about what it will look like for the data side of this. For this piece, it's really about the project management of the timeline for implementation of this work. I know that I am very excited. I know many of us are very excited for the transparency this work will bring to our communities. It's going to create, if we do it right, and if I am responsible for this, I'm going to make sure we do it right, creating systems that are really aligned to our equity goals, but also assuring every region, back to the overriding Guardrail 3, has the talent to build and maintain a strong learning community. That is our goal, that is the guardrail, and we will get there. So I believe next I'm passing it on to Dr. Blue.
And just for board members to be cogitating on this Guardrail 3 that you all have put out there, if I had to guess, this is the one that I believe will far and away be the most controversial. And so I just encourage you to go back and read through it closely and start to really get mindful about what it's actually saying. It's going to move a lot of cheese. And so just before you say, yes, this is goodness, don't be naive to the amount of disruption that Guardrail 3 is going to cause, because it is going to completely upend several very significant functions of your organization. Guardrail 4.
Thank you, AJ and Mr. DeFabo. So good evening, everyone. As we know, in order to really hone in on creating equitable educational outcomes for all students, adults across the district, not just inside of our schools, must develop and extend the skill sets and competencies necessary to become more responsive to the cultural and linguistic diversity of the students and families that we serve. Currently, the district does not have specific intentional processes, and a lot of folks have talked about that already this evening. We don't have those things in place to measure equity across the organization. So the interim metrics involved in this guardrail will revolve around creating those processes and practices. You can go to the next. Oh, okay, there you go. Thank you. So in order to help the superintendent meet the guardrail of not allowing staff to be culturally non-responsive, we've created 3 interim metrics. So the first metric, the percentage of CCS staff who complete the Equity and Inclusion Diagnostic Survey instrument will increase from 0% in April 2021 to 60% by April 2023. So we have partnered with Hanover Research to create this Equity and Inclusion Diagnostic Survey. It consists of 35 questions, which will be administered for the first time this spring to school-based and district-level staff from all employee groups, as well as students grades 6 through 12 and their families. The survey will assess participant perception related to several areas around supporting equity in schools, including the level of overall satisfaction with the district support for individuals from diverse backgrounds. And that, that's aspects such as race, diversity, religion, SES, gender, etc. It also measures school environment, and for that, it's around sense of belonging, both for students and adults. Academic environment, which is how often students are encouraged to learn from or about people who are different than themselves. Cultural representation in curriculum materials, how often adults talk to students about various dimensions of diversity, social justice, current events, things like that. Social environment, which revolves around social emotional learning, physical and psychological safety, bullying, and behavior consequences, as well as staff perceptions around recruitment and retention of staff and teachers from diverse backgrounds. Finally, families have an opportunity to provide perception data on how welcome and valued they feel in our schools, and to what extent they feel included in their students' educational process. The assumption is that the higher the return on the survey, the better informed we'll be as a district on the progress we're making around becoming more culturally proficient based on the perceptions of our staff, students, and families. And in turn, we'll be able to better meet district needs in building those skill sets. And you can go to the next slide, please. So 4.2, the percentage of CCS staff with access to curated professional development modules on cultural responsivity that are relevant to their job category will increase from 0% in May 2021 to 100% by May 2022. The Office of Equity will create a menu of curated PD modules and resources accessible to all staff that can be customized based on the skill set of, or skill levels of the individuals or by teams. Modules will cover a variety of concepts and topics related to culture, diversity, and equity that help to build cultural proficiency, and will be organized around both general and job-specific needs. The modules will be available online on the CCS intranet and will provide opportunities for both self-directed learning and facilitated learning. Modules will continue to adapt to the equity needs of the district and will provide consistency of messaging, consistency of learning objectives, and content quality, as well as consistency of the expectations for a culturally responsive teacher, administrator, or staff member. And you can move on to 4.3. The percentage of CCS staff utilizing curated professional development modules on cultural responsivity that is relevant to their job category will increase from 0% in May 2022 to 75% by May 2026. So we know that having learning opportunities available means nothing if we're not also taking advantage of those opportunities, and in turn applying the learning from those opportunities. So this guardrail will consist of putting systems in place to ensure that the expectations of the guardrail are met by all CCS employees. To that end, the Equity Department will work collaboratively with chiefs and directors across all district departments to help them find opportunities to incorporate the PD modules into department or school PD planning, and ways to evaluate employee participation in the module trainings, with the idea being that we'll later add other interim guardrails around assessing the impact of the district's ongoing equity PD, along with other coaching or support that may be needed for our employees to demonstrate proficiency around those module areas. And then you can go ahead and go to the next slide, and I will turn it over to AJ.
Wow. So that's a lot. Again, this is why we made sure that you all received this information more than a week in advance, so you've had time to just digest and dive into it. So with that being the case, it's question time. Ramona, I think you had the first question in the chat box. Go ahead and dive in.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I agree. This is a lot. I like it. In my years here, this is a different approach, and I really appreciate. I think we've talked about it before, but not in a structured way. So I really appreciate how it's coming together. I'm looking forward to seeing how it all pans out. So to that end, one of my questions is, we talk a lot about training. And one of the things that we hear from our staff is sometimes we train, we don't have enough time to practice, or we train in September and we don't get to use it till December or January, so I forget. So I'm wondering, do we have an idea of like train, practice, evaluate, and retrain? Is that something that is incorporated instead of like a one time, hope it's stuck and let's keep on going?
A lot of that training, was in some of the equity work. You want to speak to that?
Certainly. So Board Member Reyes, the idea is to have a menu of items that, for example, let's take a school may be able to choose from. And during this time of year when they may be planning for next year, they can take one module per month and kind of break it up into smaller chunks where they can, take a piece of it, practice, come back together to discuss, and do that on an ongoing basis throughout the year, so that they can have ongoing PD. So none of it is intended to be one and done, one PD a year. We tend to do that for convenience sake of adults, but we also know that when it comes to this work, it's much better to have it as an ongoing pieces. So that's the goal.
And I appreciate that. And my question kind of was for that guardrail and guardrail 2, also with the development and coaching and restorative practices. So I'm going to make the assumption that it's the same response for both. But Dr. Blue, since we're there, since we're with you, my other question there is, when you talk about staff, are we talking about training all employees, including our custodians, our bus drivers, is that included in the planning?
Yes, actually, because the guardrail reads that the superintendent will not let staff be culturally non-responsive, that is going to be all staff. So we'll be working across both academic and operations.
And I really appreciate the skill level and by teams. So another question would be, will this training be assigned or if a person wants to take another module, will they have access to taking something that they might be interested at a different level or that maybe is assigned to a teacher? If I'm a bus driver and maybe, we talk a lot about many of our current teachers used to be secretaries, or they used to be something else and they went back to school. And if they're doing that, might as well give them the opportunity to take the class now, because in 2 years, they might be teaching in our schools.
Right. So the idea is that the PD will be customizable. So if I'm the manager or the principal or, the person who may be in charge of a team, I may say, as a team, we are going to tackle this topic, at this skill level, this month or whenever. But I also have the opportunity to create my own learning plan. So I might want to, take a culturalist self-assessment to see this is where I'm starting, and therefore these are the sorts of things that I need, versus having everyone just be on one journey where people are in different places. So it's almost like, you would teach to the middle, but we don't want to do that. So we want to, so if you're more advanced around this topic, but you don't really understand how this other topic connects, then you can go that route instead. And the PD will be chunked in a way that you can take a 20-minute chunk and kind of put them together. Or if you only have your plan period or you only have your lunch hour, you can, have a smaller chunk to take it that way.
Perfect. Thank you.
Board Member Reyes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to address the restorative practices. And this is this innovation and high lift. And it's a part of the reason why it's a guardrail, because we are looking for your support as board members to be able, one of the things we learned when we first began this process is the training time. And so there is that ask of training time. We require our staff to be trained in many things. But as we take a look at foundationally, what's going to move us? Where's that going to look like? What is that going to be? And so in the work that underneath my guardrails and supporting the district, there is a conversation about how do we provide the opportunity. It's a part of the reason why we're taking a look at a regional model versus trying to do it whole district, so that we do have the embedded work. The coaching can be done during the day, and we can work with principals and administrators to kind of help that look. But those initial trainings, those conversations, and remember, it's not just about training. Restorative practice is a mind shift change. And so there is some prep work that is going to need to be done depending on the buildings and where people are. And so we are wrapping that into the conversation and into the planning, but it is a conversation about training time, training dates as you all move forward and take a look at the calendar.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Michael, you had a question next?
I wasn't.
Was somebody still trying to answer that question?
No, I had another question.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Mama.
That's okay. I only have two more. So one's a state. So Dr. Dixon, in the past, we have had a lot of surveys brought into the district, right? Some that are by us and for us, but others, we have a lot of partners and professional organizations that keep on serving our whole staff. Is there any, and maybe it's a comment, just that might be something we may have to consider. I heard survey a lot in our conversations here. So I know that there's external partners that do a lot of surveying of our students, of our buildings. And I just want to make sure that our district knows which ones are impactful and needed for this work in order for it to move forward. So.
Yes, thank you. We are looking at ways to capture data throughout the school district from multiple stakeholders, in which platform would be best to do that. So we're having some conversations because to your point, we even found that, for example, Panorama allows you to capture more data than just what we've been capturing now. You can get student data, stakeholder data. So we're looking at that. We want to be able to provide more information throughout the district and finalizing what platform that we will be using.
I just want to make sure you hit that 60%, because if they're answering 12 surveys, you're not going to get that, because they're going to answer one survey and think that's it.
Yeah, thank you.
And then lastly, I appreciate the shorter timelines for Guardrail 3. I see 2023. I'm like, ouch. When we're talking about being equitable across the district, we use bus drivers and cafeteria staff and so forth this past year due to COVID to help us in teaching our students. Will they be included in the personnel allocation discussion?
Yes. So the comprehensive staffing model for the school is based off of everything that is a school support. So everything you have at a school, that will be in the model. So if a school has 300 students, that equals X number of, we need this, or we need this, or we need this. So it should look comprehensively at a school so that we can say, here is the overall personnel spend based on the budget for this school. I think it might be a little more difficult with bus drivers, because bus drivers can work across multiple spaces. But food service, I think it could be a lot more targeted.
And Mr. DeFabio, are we getting you more HR personnel in this model?
Yeah, I'm going to add about 20 more people to that FAC presentation on Wednesday.
I'm just saying.
No, just kidding.
I'm just saying, a 6-member HR team is not going to be the number 3 guardrail. Just saying.
No,
it's tough.
That's all my questions. Thank you.
Well, I realize we are at our previously intended time. And so I do want to take a few more questions before I wrap up, but I also want to clarify. This is the beginning of the conversation, at the end. You're not voting on anything right now. This is just the introduction. There will be a subsequent meeting where you all will have to make decisions of, do we want to move forward, with approving these? And so this is not your last chance for questions, but this is just our opening salvo for clarity. Michael, you have the next. And then James, you've been uncharacteristically quiet. I don't trust that, so I'm coming to you next, bro.
That is uncanny. Thank you so much, AJ. Thank you, administration, for an outstanding presentation. I really like the growth modeling that we're looking at. My pushback on that a little bit is, my criticism of it a little bit is constructively, that there are certain instances, particularly in the lower grades, where I think that we can be a little more aggressive. I do realize that there is a drawback because of COVID, but I think that we can tend to be a bit more aggressive in that early childhood development space between kindergarten and kindergarten and second grade, third grade. The other piece is, I really love, we are making a reinvestment in PD. We spent years, because of budget cuts, having to draw back our investment in that space. And I think it hurt the district overall, particularly when we took on restorative practices and really didn't get to grow it out as aggressively as we sought to initially. But I'm glad that that is still on the table and you have an effective use for it that I think will pay tremendous dividend to the district and our children and our students, our staff. The other piece is a question that is relative to our collective bargaining units. One is, I definitely want to make sure that this administration has gotten the buy-in from our collective bargaining units. Now, it goes without saying that the body goes where the head goes. Where the head goes, the body goes. But I definitely think that this becomes a lot more effective when there is buy-in from our institutional partners, particularly in collective bargain. So I want to make sure that, and this is a question, how much buy-in have we really gotten from them? How much a part of this design are they? And what are we looking to institutionalize this more in the contract process moving forward? This has to be high priority.
I want to jump in here with a couple things, because this is worth lifting up for all of the board members. So here's where this process comes full circle. So as a board, you have said, here's our community's vision, our goals, and here are our community's values, our guardrails. Your staff has responded to that by saying, if these are what you say are the community's goals, then here's how we would measure that. And if these are what you say are the community's values, then here's how we'd measure that. So if you don't like any of the interim goals, guess what the board's job is?
No, I hear you.
You gotta go back and decide, do we have the right goals? And if you don't like any of the interim guardrails, guess what the board's job is? Then we gotta go back and decide,
Absolutely.
Are we, did we accurately capture the values of the community, and are we prepared to stand with that? And so it's actually, the thing I'd push back on is I think you're correct. I think there does have to be a calibration conversation, but that calibration conversation right now is more about the board and the community than it is about the staff and the community. Like the staff is responding to you. So if the interim guardrails are off, that means you all need to consider whether or not you need to adjust the guardrails. If the interim goals seem off to you, then you need to decide, do we need to adjust the goals? So for example, if you think that pre-K2, that number, instead of going from here to here, should be going from here to here, then that means you probably need to adjust the goal to say, instead of going from here to here, the goal needs to be from here to here. And then they will go and respond by adjusting the interim goal to be responsive to your leadership. Similarly, if you're worried about what is the buy-in on some of the guardrails? You all wrote the guardrails. So if you look at the interim guardrails and say, I don't know if all of our partners are going to be down to ride on this one, then that's a conversation you all as a board need to go back and have with the community stakeholders and say, hey, look, this is what you told us the value was, but the only way that our staff has brought, the only way our staff can meaningfully measure whether or not we're honoring these value is these things, is, are you still committed to this value? So for example, the one, that your treasurer brings forward, which is just the math nerd in me loves unendingly, because what you've got there is a correlation. It says we've got a very low correlation, 0.1, and all of that means that's just fancy terminology to describe the extent to which there's a linear relationship between two variables. As one goes up, does the other go up? That's a very strong correlation. If whenever this one moves, the other one moves in concert, that's a strong correlation. If this one goes up, but this one kind of just goes sideways or goes down, then it's a less strong correlation. What your staff is saying is that because you told them that resources have to be distributed equitably, that's what you said. They didn't make that up themselves. That was your value that you wrote down. That they went back and said, okay, then that means when we spend money, there has to be a correlation between how that money is spent and the needs of our students. And that correlation needs to grow over time rather than stay the same over time. But the only way that's going to happen is it's going to completely re-architect how you spend money. Because right now, there's a whole lot of this about equity, but you can't prove that there's any of this. And so when you do this, you're necessarily going to move money around. And this is what I said, this is going to be, you're going to find you play with money and all of a sudden people go feel some kind of way. That's why I said this is going to be one of your more controversial ones. Similarly, one of your other ones around equitable distribution of resources, your most valuable resource is humans. That is more valuable than the money you have. Like all the money in the world won't save little AJ. An amazing teacher will. An amazing teacher will make a life and death difference in the life of a child. You could throw money at it all day long. And so what they're saying is we want to.
It's an amazing staff.
It's
a segue to my next question, because you've made a very cogent argument. I won't take that away, but it's also very theoretical because folks can behave entirely different too. And I've seen it. It'd be one thing if I didn't see it happen.
Oh yeah.
So I don't want to spend all night on that. But what I do want to say is that we have to work to ensure that there's buy-in and that there's belief, that we close this belief gap in the district about how and what we intend to do. That's all I'm saying.
And what I'm suggesting is if you all as a board have concerns about that, that's not a staff job to go resolve. That's a y'all job. If you all as a board is like, well, we don't know if this actually syncs up, then just like you went out 2 by 2 and had a conversation before, and y'all gonna have to saddle up and go on back out and have some conversation like, okay, this is what this means now in reality. When it was theoretical, back when we just had goals and guardrails, y'all were down for that. But now here's what it means in reality. Are you still going to ride with us on this or not? But again, the only thing I'm pushing back on isn't that it's the wrong conversation. It's the exact right conversation. The only thing I'm pushing back on is the way you were describing it sounds like it's a Talisa job. I'm saying this is a Michael job.
I see this very practically and very realistically as an all hands on deck effort, and not just the board, not just our staff, our administrators, also our students and their families and everybody else in this city who says they want to or are partners contractually, or whether it's just in good faith. It's everybody's job. And where one fails, the whole plan gets thrown off. That's just keeping it 100, period. Pardon my colloquialism. But I want to go to my next question, which is my closing question, because we're over time and I want to be respectful of that. The collective bargaining unit of our OPSI folks, our CSCA folks. Are we looking to leverage this PD support for them as well? I think that they are as integral and needing of this training as much as any of our school teachers or any other staff. I think that a lot of their staff need this training as well, from the teachers' assistants to the secretaries, to the librarians, to the bus drivers. Where are we looking to be inclusive of that population of folks to make sure that they get this training opportunity? Thank you.
So if I would like to just add, one of the things that we're adding to our organization is a Department of Professional Development and Training. So that is something that we will have moving forward. We will hire a director to lead that piece along with some other staff members, because we recognize the professional development is important and training for the entire staff. We're creating this culture of learning for everyone in the entire organization. So that, coupled with ensuring that staff members receive the training they needed to make sure that the guardrails, we know restorative practices, et cetera, and also with the culture responsive staff, those are trainings that will be provided for everyone throughout the organization. So we're going to have those trainings for everyone in the organization, just as Dr. Blue and Cheryl Ward stated. But we also are going to have a new department that we're developing that would be structured around professional development and training for the entire CCS staff.
James, you're up.
Thank you, AJ, and thank you, Dr. Dixon, and to everyone that presented tonight. Very enthusiastic about taking this on as we move forward. I do agree with Michael in that I would want to see a bit more aggressive goals for our younger grade levels. I think that the conversation for that would be more appropriate after we get the baseline data. And so maybe that is something that we can kind of jump into later on in the summer. I also believe that Michael was correct in his assessment around making sure that our collective bargaining units are on board with this. I do, and I've not been shy about this. I do believe that all of that conversation is a board conversation. That cannot fall back to the administration. We have given the administration a directive that responded to that directive. Any type of challenges that may be in place, that's the board's responsibility to overcome them, and we cannot hide behind the administration in doing that. Now, what I would ask from Dr. Dixon and her team is that they are open and very specific in what those obstacles may be. I think the different approach that we have to take with this is that we cannot continue to whisper in dark corners about the real obstacles to some of the things that we want to see done for our students within this district. Sometimes we go off someplace and we say it very quietly so that the world does not really know and understand what's really happening, and our students continue to fall behind further and further. What we need is an open, honest discussion about what the real obstacles are so that the board is equipped with honest information that's given to the public about what it is that we need to do to incorporate their goals into the culture of this district. These are the public's goals. We are the representatives of the public. And sometimes we don't do a good enough job of saying, yes, you all want these types of things, but here is why we cannot make that happen. And that has to stop if we are to ever move our young people forward. And so, I've not been shy about that, the aspect of that and what that really means for board members as individuals and as collective. I know that some of the things that we have to do in order for our students to be successful are not going to be welcomed by adults. And we have to come to terms with that. And that's a very, very difficult thing for us to face when we do our own self-inventory. But that is something that that, you know, if we ever want to change public education around the country, we've got to do it, and we've got to do it in earnest. And so I am ready to get to the decision making and the work. I appreciate everyone and their questions tonight. I think they were really sound questions. Some of you asked some questions that I had, and so I really appreciate that. But I
All right, well said.
Today, vote on it and start making it happen. So thank you.
With Carol's prompting, I did go back and look at your strategic planning timeline, and you all did articulate a desire of circling back to community stakeholders once you had your interim goals and interim guardrails in hand. So yes, that is already a natural part of your plan that you had already contemplated many months ago. So that's not a new addition. That's just executing the plan that you all came up with. I will clarify, however, that is to go back out to all your stakeholders, not to go back out to just your collective bargaining units or just to parents. This is what you have previously contemplated is a more broad re-engagement, just to say, here is the work product that we've got. Now we're just verifying that this is still the right stuff. And so with that, again, recognizing this is the first slice of this, not the last, I want to hand it back over to your board chair. Before I do, I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank the staff for tolerating me. I was probably not the most charitable individual throughout the entirety of this process, and so I apologize for whatever proclivities you were subjected to. That being said, I am incredibly proud of the body of work that the staff has put together, and look forward to being able to share it with, to partner with you and sharing it with other districts to get a sense of what's possible when you kind of take all of restraint away and just dream of what a completely different district could look like. And so, Madam Superintendent, just bravo, and thanks for letting me be along for the journey. Madam Chair, back to you.
Thank you. Before I close, Dr. Dixon, any last thing you'd like to say?
No, just thank you to the team, the amazing team. They brought it all forward. Thank you. We have an entire cabinet team on tonight watching and listening. So thank you for all of your hard work. AJ, again, yes, you pushed us and you pushed us. Alignment was the key. We wanted to make sure that this work was aligned and that we could achieve the goals that we're set out to achieve, but they were also bold goals. And so, and to Board Member Cole, we talked about that you were going to suggest that we may need it to go a little higher with the reading goals for the younger ones. So we're getting to know you guys pretty well. We called that one out. We said Board Member Cole is going to push us on that one. So thank you for your push. Thank you for wanting to make sure that our work represented what you heard from the community. That was important for me, that when you go back to the community, you're going back with what you heard. So that triangulation is there. So I appreciate that. And we know there's still more work to be done. This work is not finished, and we have some next steps that we're going to talk about a little bit more at our next at the next board meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. So thank you, board members, for having a great discussion. Again, thank you, staff. This is just the beginning of our work, and I think that we are able to accomplish this work because we all agree collectively where we're going. We agree to the vision. And the thing is, we are taking some new bold steps, things that you know, we've never done before, that maybe no other district has done before. We're really pushing things like measuring equity. Like, this is new stuff, right? And so we also need to make sure that we're living up to our principles, those attributes that we want our students to, about being adaptable and having empathy, and knowing that as we move through this journey, we might misstep. We might need to take a step back and relook at data and recalibrate. And that's okay. That's all part of the growing process. We have to be a growing, learning organization to continue to push forward. I'm super excited about this journey. That's my goal, is just to keep pushing. And Dr. Dixon knows I'm always pushing us to keep moving forward. So the next steps will be, board members, I need you to go back and look at everything. We're going to put this on the agenda for our next board meeting. I will put it up for a vote, but we'll see how it goes. If you have more questions or more, you know, we can put, we can table, but I'm going to go ahead and set it on for the next board meeting. And then as board member Beckerly mentioned, we will go back out and do that touch base with community members. We will also do it in terms of not just talking about our goals and guardrails, but also our portrait. And we're going to wait for that to be fully unveiled and all of the excitement around that. But we definitely want to go back out there because we promised that we would come back, and we definitely want to do that. So that's kind of our next steps. And to board member Ragland's point about getting to work on this stuff. So board members, just a little bit of a heads up, when we come back from break, like July, we don't meet in July. We're going to have a new look and feel to our board meetings. So it's not going to be the same old, same old. We have to change in the vision, and we have to put this work up front and center, which means we're going to have to think about a new structure and way to handle our business, aligned with this work. So we're going to get down to it, and I'm excited that we're all on this path together. So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So
Second.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Let me make sure I got that. I had board member Brown with the motion and board member Cole with the second. All right, Ms. Beckerly?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Dr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Ragland?
Yes.
Vice President Reyes?
Yes.
President Adair?
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you all. Have a great evening, and we will see you very soon. Good night.